Hello again. It's been a while, but I'm back just starting the Easter weekend. Hope everyone's doing really well. Picked up a couple of more movies that I'm gonna share today. I'm just gonna kick this off right away. So I grabbed Saturday Night Fever on Blu-ray. Recently I've been starting to upgrade a couple of old DVDs to either digital or Blu-ray, and Saturday Night Fever is one of those movies that I've always been a fan of ever since I saw it on TV when I was a teenager. A John Travolta classic from the 70s. Everybody knows the Bee Gees songs, especially Stayin' Alive and all those great classic disco tunes. But this is actually a bit more than just kind of a disco dancing movie. It's actually kind of an urban tragedy in disguise. I've always enjoyed that aspect of it. I really like the characters, the way they're written, the way they're acted. Tony Manero in this is just a complete douchebag. He's just a hopeless, very prejudiced, very sexist, horrible young man who has to sort of learn humility. And yeah, it's I don't know. I always enjoy this movie because it starts off sort of fun and funny, and you think it's gone for one thing, which is what everybody knows, the sort of polyester suits and the disco dancing. But eventually it goes down a more serious and kind of darker path, and you get to sort of ruminate on the sort of Brooklyn and New York youth in the late 70s, because New York City was not a nice place to live in the 70s, if I understand that correctly. I think it was kind of a hellhole, for lack of a better term. But one ironic thing about this particular edition is I bought this cover here because I was sure that this would be the director's cut, because in the United States they just released a new version of Saturday Night Fever with this exact cover, which contains a couple of new scenes. I think there's 2 new scenes in there. 2 very brief scenes, not a lot to write home about, but I wanted that edition. And then I bought this one, and I was 99% sure it was the director's cut, but it's not. This is not the director's cut of Saturday Night Fever. So that kind of bummed me out, to be honest. But yeah, still really fun to upgrade this one and have it on Blu-ray. Looks great on Blu-ray, sounds great on Blu-ray, and the soundtrack is just awesome. So also grabbed, of course, being a massive Stephen King fan, in the month of April, we're celebrating the 30th anniversary of this movie adaptation, and that is Pet Sematary. This is a really cool new steelbook edition of Pet Sematary from Mondo, I believe. Mondo is, if you're not familiar with them, is an art company. They do sort of very independent art. They have a very particular style. They have a lot of great talent, a lot of great artists, but they tend to have, as in this case, a sort of a cartoony style with very selected muted colors for the most part. I'm not crazy about their color choices all the time, to be honest, but this is pretty cool. You've got Church the cat there on the cover, and sorry about the reflections there. This slides off, this plastic cover, and then you've got the actual steelbook itself here, which wraps around kind of like that. Really, really nicely done. And this contains the new remastered Blu-ray edition of the 1989 film and the original DVD edition as well. So yeah, just a gorgeous edition, and this is widely available all across the world, I think, in most countries anyway, because I was able to get this in Scandinavia, you know, like an official Scandinavian release, so that's really cool. The movie itself, it's kind of a different story. You know, this is one of these Stephen King movies and one of the horror movies that scared the absolute crap out of me when I was a child. This movie scared me senseless, especially the stuff with Zelda, the creepy sister who's got the spinal meningitis or whatever. Scare the crap out of me, like a lot of people. I still see grown men and grown women on the internet today saying they can't watch the scenes with Zelda because it's too upsetting for them. But that being said, this movie has not aged very well, in my opinion. It was released 30 years ago to the month, and it is not as good as I remember it being. It's a very, very, very cheesy movie, actually. It's very over the top. The acting is really not great. Dale Midkiff, who plays the lead in this one, is a very wooden. He's got sort of B or C grade actor written in his forehead. He's very wooden and stiff, and it's got all of these silly moments. On the other hand, it does have some pretty creepy moments, and it is pretty faithful to the novel overall. So that is a big plus for me. I do like seeing that they stayed pretty close to the Stephen King novel overall. They made a couple of tweaks here and there, but nothing too major. One of the things they changed a little bit is the ending. The ending in the novel, it ends like a moment sooner. So it's slightly more ambiguous. In the movie, they went for a very knock you over the head kind of ending, and they end with that silly Ramones song, and it's just like, it could have been better. But nevertheless, a really lovely steelbook edition. And I celebrated the original Pet Sematary, and on the same day, also, as I watched this, I also went out and watched the new Pet Sematary, the remake of Pet Sematary, or re-adaptation, or whatever you want to call it. I liked that one overall. Didn't love it. It was decent, I thought, but it wasn't great. So I didn't think it was awful, but I didn't think it was great either. That one was a lot darker, a lot more serious and somber. It's almost nihilistic in tone. The acting is much better in the new one, I think, but they changed a lot of stuff from the novel. They used the novel as a starting point, but then they used the characters in very, very different ways in the new one. So it's almost a different story with the same characters, if that makes any sense. Same core story, but they used the characters very, very differently in that one. So that was pretty interesting. So yeah, neither one of these two movies are great. The original is not great. The remake is not great. But I'm going to give a slight preference to the remake, if I'm honest, because it's a bit more serious, it's a bit darker, but some of the horror scenes in that too are very overblown and overdone. But yeah, that's Pet Sematary, beautiful Mondo steelbook. So grab this one if you haven't already, if you want to get your hands on the best edition of Pet Sematary available to date. Here's an animated movie that has not been available on Blu-ray previously, and I've been waiting for years upon years upon years upon years for this movie to finally arrive on Blu-ray, and it finally did. It is The Prince of Egypt. This is the classic DreamWorks animated film from 1998. This has actually been available on streaming services and digital services and all manner of stuff. It's on Netflix. It's been on Netflix for years, I think. It's been on iTunes, I think, as well. But it's never, ever been released on Blu-ray up until now. I think this was made available in January of 2019. So it's been about 12 years? 12 or 13 years of the format, and they still didn't release this until now, which I think is kind of strange. I've always loved The Prince of Egypt. I saw this on VHS when I was about 10 years old, 10 or 11 years old. It was one of those movies we bought on VHS. Watched it a bunch of times, and I was immediately struck by how different this was from everything else I'd ever seen that was animated. This does not feel like a Disney movie to me, and I love that. This is the tone is more serious overall. It still has jokes and humor and songs and stuff of that nature, but it's a more somber movie overall. I like that it's slower paced. It's also got this grandeur about it, like a very epic disaster movie almost. So it's got those sort of, I don't know, it's got a more mature quality to it, which I picked up on immediately as a kid, and I've always enjoyed that. Animation and animated films, in my opinion, have never ever just been about being cartoony and being funny and being goofy and humorous. It's not just for kids. I was always drawn to the stuff that was more oriented towards adults, like Batman the Animated Series, anime, movies like The Prince of Egypt, stuff that was a bit more serious and somber in tone. So I'm really happy that this is finally available on Blu-ray. It looks fine, you know, it's not gonna, you know, make your jaw drop to the floor or anything. It looks just fine. I wanted a physical disc of this because I've always loved this movie ever since I was a kid. And yeah, just wanted to have this on my shelf officially. I always say that The Prince of Egypt and The Iron Giant are my two favorite non-Disney, non-Ghibli animated movies, and now I have them both on Blu-ray, finally. So if you haven't got it already, you can finally pick up The Prince of Egypt if you're as big a fan as I am. I had a tax return and there was a sale on movies, and I picked up the Bad Boys collection. You got Bad Boys 1 and Bad Boys 2, the 20th anniversary collection set. A lot of people don't like Michael Bay, but I'll explain why I grabbed this one. Growing up, me and my brother were really, really big fans of the original Bad Boys. It was one of those movies that we caught on TV in the late 90s, I want to say. And we taped it off of TV and we watched that movie again and again and again and again. It's one of our go-to movies, me and my brother. We would just sit and have fun, eat candy and snacks and shoot the shit and watch Bad Boys. That was sort of one of our movies that we watched. So watching it again, I can still sort of recite all the lines, or they come back to me like a second before they speak the lines, if that makes any sense. So I've got most of the movie sort of memorized in my head. And I think Bad Boys is a really competent action movie because Michael Bay didn't have all the money in the world the way he does now. Now he's got millions upon millions upon millions of dollars, and he can just do anything. Like pump out shitty Transformers sequel after shitty Transformers sequel. But back then, he didn't have a lot of money to work with. I think this movie's made for about $19 million all told, which means his budget was around 9 or 10 million, like effectively, so somewhere around there, which is peanuts compared to the stuff that he's working with now. But I've always liked Bad Boys because it's a very competent action movie, but it's also very, very funny in my opinion. It's got a lot of great humor to it. It's got a lot of great jokes, a lot of great humor to it. And it's just a very entertaining movie. It moves like a freight train. It's got Will Smith and Martin Lawrence. They've got wonderful chemistry. I think about 80 or 90% of their scenes were, ad-libbed or made up on the spot. Like they just improvised a lot of the stuff in this movie, and it shows because it's funnier that way. If you listen to the audio commentary from Michael Bay, he said he had tons of problems on this movie because he had no money. The studio was completely against him. He was a complete rookie almost. He had only directed music videos. He had never directed a movie, and he hated the script. So he basically threw the script out and he allowed Martin Lawrence and Will Smith to just improvise their lines. They took the situation and said, how would you act this out? And that's how the movie was born. And it worked. It's a really entertaining comedic action movie, action comedy. So Bad Boys 2, on the other hand, not quite as great. It's an okay action movie. It's fairly entertaining, I guess, but it's never been great. Now they're working on the third one, Bad Boys for Life. Strange title for a third movie in my opinion, but what are you going to do? So that's going to be interesting. But yeah, the first one is the best, but this particular set was almost cheaper than buying the first one standalone, so figured why not grab it. So Bad Boys, really fun movie. It's stood the test of time fairly well. It's very 90s and very very overblown. Like movies in the 90s were, I don't know, it's interesting. It was less CGI and less special effects, but it was more of a tonal thing and more of the line delivery and the music and stuff like that is still very, very overblown. So, but it's a Michael Bay movie, so what are you gonna do? Anyway, I always loved Bad Boys. Second one is decent, but cool to finally have these on Blu-ray. Actually never owned any Bad Boys movies at all. My brother had these two on DVD, but I never actually owned these movies, so it's cool to have them. Another one that was cheap, finally upgraded the DVDs, the Spider-Man Deluxe Trilogy set. All three Sam Raimi movies. And here's a minor pet peeve of mine. My OCD is itching, my spidey sense is itching. Notice there's a Blu-ray logo up there, and there's a Blu-ray logo down there as well. So you've got two of them for some reason. That annoys the hell out of me. But anyway, Spider-Man classic superhero movies. I've not been a fan of the newer MCU Spider-Man Homecoming and Civil War. I'm just not a fan. It's just not my Spider-Man. Like hashtag not my Spider-Man. I'm sorry. I know a lot of people love the new Spider-Man, but I'm more about the classic trilogy and the Amazing Spider-Man movies to a certain extent. I own them. I watch them occasionally. I don't think they're as awful as people make them out to be, but they're also not as good as the Sam Raimi movies. And I think I would agree with most people that Spider-Man 1 is very good, Spider-Man 2 is the absolute best, and Spider-Man 3 is the weakest. Maybe I don't quite agree as much with those statements. Like, I don't think Spider-Man 2 is an untouchable masterpiece. I think it's the best in the collection for sure. And I don't think Spider-Man 3 is this awful, horrible mess of a movie. I still think that's pretty watchable overall. So all of these movies are pretty watchable. And I remember when the original Spider-Man was coming out in 2002, it was still a really big deal. Like, today you've got these MCU cinematic universes, and it's just part of everyday life now. But growing up, this was a really big deal. The first Sam Raimi Spider-Man. I remember we'd had like Blade and X-Men at that point, but there was no Spider-Man movie yet. And I remember going to school when I was about 12 or 13 years old, I think, maybe around 13, 14. And I remember someone in our school had actually cut out an article and put it up on the wall in our sort of common area. So every time you walked in there and took your shoes off, you saw an article with the first photo of Spider-Man from the movie. So that was kind of a, you know, it was a big deal. It was like, this has never been done before, so to speak. But yeah, really fun movies. They hold up very well overall, I think. I like the Tobey Maguire movies, and I like the Andrew Garfield Amazing Spider-Man movies too, actually. I think they had something interesting going for them, again, with that more darker, more mature, serious tone. So I don't despise those movies at all. I would rather watch the worst of these, like Spider-Man 3 and The Amazing Spider-Man 2, like 10 times over than watch Spider-Man Homecoming, because I just hated that movie. I just hated every moment of it, because the entire movie was just one big joke. It was just one big joke all the time. They were just joking all the time. I couldn't take anything seriously, not even remotely seriously. I couldn't get invested even a smidge in the characters, because they were just joking all the time. And I was just like, this is so juvenile, it's so childish, it's so pointless, it's so... Spider-Man is such a great character, why just waste him on just the humor? I think both the Sam Raimi movies and the Andrew Garfield Amazing Spider-Man movies had a nice balance, at least, of action and humor and drama. You know, there's a nice balance to them all the time. You know, maybe the Andrew Garfield movies didn't have quite as much humor, maybe the humor didn't work as much, but I would rather have that than just juvenile, childish humor all the time. That's my opinion. And frankly, I haven't even seen Into the Spider-Verse, because it's just... The more I see out of the trailers and images and featurettes, and the more I see people praise it, I feel like it's not for me. Like, I can tell that the more people praise it, especially sort of for the millennial generation, the more it's up their alley, the less it's going to appeal to me. I can just tell. I can just completely tell. I know you shouldn't judge a movie until you've seen it. That's actually the truth. I do believe that, but I can sense it in my bones that Into the Spider-Verse is not going to be for me. So, to me, there are 5 Spider-Man movies. There's the trilogy by Sam Raimi, and you have the 2 Amazing Spider-Man movies. And that's enough for me. I know there are others. I know people love them, but I'm happy with my 5 Spider-Man movies, and these are some of the best. So, cool to finally upgrade to these. I also have Spider-Man 2.1 on DVD still. I kept that around because it's kind of an extended cut, or an alternate cut of Spider-Man 2, which is pretty interesting. They've sort of switched around a couple of scenes and changed a couple of things, so it's interesting to compare the two. But this is just the plain old, good old-fashioned theatrical vanilla versions of the Spider-Man trilogy. So, and one more thing, last but certainly not least, I made a video previously where I talked about Star Trek: The Original Series, and I talked a lot about how crappy the packaging was on that the Full Journey, I think it was called. It was kind of this box set, this sort of rectangular box set. But I finally sold that off for nickels and dimes, and I bought this set instead. Much nicer set, this one. The main difference between the sets is how the discs are packaged. In the other, the discs were in these thin, flimsy sleeves, paper sleeves, and they were bouncing around like crazy, just bouncing all over the place, and they were scratched the moment I got that set. Scratched to hell. So I was never able to actually watch the entire series. I was able to watch most of it, but a lot of episodes just flat out didn't work. So I'm so happy to finally have this set. It's the exact same discs. It's the exact same content as before, but it's just a lot better packaged. It's just that simple. It's just this very, very, very large. It's got this nice embossed slipcover with the nice colors there, and then it's just this massive Blu-ray clam case that you open up like so, and then discs are sort of stacked on top of each other like that. But that is a million times better than the old set. Out of what I did see out of Star Trek the original series, I did enjoy it. I did enjoy it very much. It's obviously, this was made in the 60s. It was a long time ago. We're talking 50 years ago. So it is a it was a very different time. So it's cheesy, and it's the pace is quite slow by modern standards. In fact, I think most teenagers these days would not last a single episode of Star Trek the original series. They would be bored out of their minds. But when you get a little older, I think you can appreciate the show more, because it was commenting on a lot of social themes, on a lot of political themes, on a lot of things going on in the world at the time. So it's actually quite a clever show. Beyond all the silly makeup and the funny, moments, it's actually, it's got some brains. It was actually way ahead of its time, this show, in terms of inclusivity and forward thinking, and it was commenting on a lot of turmoil happening in the 60s, and it's a classic show for a reason. It stood the test of time. It's a lot of fun to watch, and even if you watch it ironically, which I often do, I'll just throw on an episode here and there and watch like a funny episode and get a laugh out of it. It's still fun to watch, and it looks fantastic on Blu-ray as well. They've done an amazing remastering job on this. It just looks pristine. Scanned the original elements and gone back, and you can also choose between the original special effects from the 1960s, the way it looked back then, and remastered special effects from the early 2000s, when these were made back in 2006, I want to say. Somewhere around there, I'm not quite sure. You get to choose whatever version you prefer to watch. I watched the newer effects, the more modern look, because I like that element, sort of updating it a little bit, because it sort of brought me into the show easier. It was easier for me to sort of contend with the pacing when the special effects were a little bit more modern and cool looking, let's put it that way. But you get to choose. That's one of the great benefits of this, and that's exactly how Star Wars should have been done years ago. This is the way it should have been done. I know Blu-ray wasn't around when George Lucas made the special editions in like 97, but still he should have released 2 Blu-ray discs for each movie, one with the original theatrical unaltered versions and one with the new special effects. So they did that correctly. That's the way you remaster these special effects. Give the fans the option to choose whatever they prefer. So anyway, nice to have this set again. It's gonna be fun to revisit this. I don't know if I'll sit down and rewatch the entire series again, at least not anytime soon. But it's definitely great to have it again. It feels great to have it in a nice box set, in a nice substantial box set, because of the quality and the time that's gone into this. Plus the fact that you get to choose which types of special effects you want. I mean, you can't do that on a streaming service. And you get all these great bonus features, including documentaries and a lot of insightful audio commentaries as well. So Star Trek the original series, I probably prefer the Next Generation overall, but I like watching the original series, albeit perhaps in a more ironic sort of way, I guess. There's always sort of an ironic touch to it, but it's not all fun and games. It's got a lot of interesting themes. It was, again, way ahead of its time, and it does really touch on some really powerful and dramatic things. But I think most of us are, at this point, I think most of us watch this show because it's sort of a relic, to be honest. And that's okay, It's all right. The Twilight Zone is another great show that I also really love and respect from the 60s. And I also have that on Blu-ray. It's also gotten a really nice remastering job. It's aged well, but it's also like, you can tell it's from the 60s and things weren't the way they are today in terms of like, production quality and stuff like that. So, but that's okay. Anyway, that's it for this video. All I wanted to share today, the Star Trek the original series. So if you're going to pick this series up on Blu-ray, please make sure that you buy this set. This is the set to buy. Don't buy that sort of squarish, greenish, or was it blue? I think it was blue maybe, but don't buy that thing. Buy this set, because your discs will be 100,000 times safer in this little box than they ever were in that one. So let's recap a little bit. Spider-Man, the Deluxe Trilogy, classic superhero movies. Bad Boys 1 and 2, fun action movies from Michael Bay, and then they're gearing up for a third one. The Prince of Egypt, a really somber but really well-made animated movie with great music, I might add. The music is fantastic in this, by Hans Zimmer and all manner. It got a great cast too. I forgot to mention that about this, but I love the music, love the cast, love the animation. But overall, I think I love the tone, which is serious, but it's got these dramatic, epic moments as well. Pet Sematary, the 1989 movie, celebrating its 30th anniversary with this Mondo Steelbook edition with these nice glowing cat eyes there. And Saturday Night Fever, a 70s classic with John Travolta, which is a fun, colorful disco romp that sort of turns into a more serious drama film by the end. So yeah, that's pretty much it for this video. Hope you've enjoyed this one. I'm gonna celebrate Easter now, and I hope you have a nice one as well. I'm expecting 1 or 2 more DC related Blu-rays in the mail soon, and one of them is Batman the Animated Series. That's right, I finally bit the bullet on that one. For a moment there I was like, I can't buy Batman the Animated Series again. I've got it on DVD. I just bought it on DVD a couple of years ago, but then I saw, I think it was IGN, out of all the YouTube channels in the world, uploaded comparison videos where you could see the old DVDs compared to the Blu-rays, and it was night and day. Huge difference. So I'll get to that eventually. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the future. Have a great Easter. See you around. Bye. If you haven't got this already, you can finally pick up The Prince of Egypt.